So I want to talk about the real reason, or what I think is the real reason, for the United States illegally bombing Iran, and this war literally being a war of existentialism for the United States. And before we get into this, no, I don't think this is about Iran being the number one global state sponsor of terror and them having nukes. I think that that's BS. I think that every reason that the United States has given for going to war with Iran has been complete BS. Yes, this is about the Epstein files, and I'll continue to bring that up every single day when I talk about the war. Trump is deeply compromised. He's all over the Epstein files. Israel has that information because Epstein was Mossad. He worked with intelligence agencies all over the world, and so Israel has that information. Bibi can blackmail Trump, and basically what I think happened was Netanyahu has wanted to go to war with Iran for over 40 years, and he's finally got his Make-A-Wish president in Donald Trump, and he has the leverage to be able to do it, to say, look, we're going to go to war with Iran, and if you don't help us out, we're going to release the tapes. So that is number one. I think that's fairly obvious. The other reason being that this is about oil and natural resources. That's one of the reasons the United States starts wars with countries all the time. That's why we started the war with Iraq. It wasn't about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. It was about having the natural resources and also regional hegemony. It's about having control. Iran is an oil-rich country. They're also a major player in the Middle East, and they happen to be allied with a bunch of U.S. adversaries. So I think that that's number two. But the third reason, and this is the one that I want to actually talk about, is the petrodollar, and why that is so important, and the thing that literally underpins the entire financial system in the United States, and why this is a war of existentialism for the United States. So what I'm going to do is going to be fairly complicated, but hopefully I can do it in a concise way. Before I get into it, please do me a huge solid. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the bell. All of those things take you less than 2 seconds, and what I'm about to talk about is super important. So I want to start with modern monetary theory. You're like, what? I thought you were talking about the petrodollar. I promise I'll link it all. So MMT, for people who are not familiar, is how the United States government actually functions in terms of what we spend on and how it gets quote unquote paid for. The government does not function like a household. We don't have to have the money in order to spend the money, okay? Money gets spent into existence through the budgets that the U.S. government creates. So if they say we're going to spend $1 trillion on the military, they spend that money into existence. And then the way that you control the money supply is through taxes. The taxes don't pay for the spending, as it were. The taxes control the money supply so that it controls inflation. Now, we own and control our own sovereign currency, this is what MMT is about. We own and control our own sovereign currency, so we can literally print as much money as we want, as long as we control the inflation through taxes. And by the way, guys, I'm not an economist. I've just read a lot about this. I've watched hours and hours of podcasts on this. If you want a much better explanation, a much more high-level explanation of how this works, I would highly recommend checking out somebody like Steve Grumbine or Stephanie Kelton. They're both experts on MMT, and they'll give you a much better explanation. But the basic idea is we spend money into existence, and then you control the money supply through taxes. Now, the U.S. government does not tax enough in order to control how much money gets printed, and namely because we don't tax the billionaires anywhere near enough. And so all of the money that doesn't get taxed out of the system is going towards inflation, and then it gets tacked onto the national debt. Okay, so I also want to talk about the reason why we have this, which is the gold standard. The gold standard was something where the US dollar used to be backed by a hard asset. It used to be backed by gold. Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 1970s. And so the money now has no value except for what the U.S. government gives it. And the only reason the government gives it value is because we can tax it. So I promise I'm going to get to the petrodollar. This is tying everything together. The money it's a fiat currency. It's not tied to any hard asset. We can print as much as we want. The money is literally worthless unless we give it value. And the way we give it value is through taxing the money. So the petrodollar is something that was established back in the 1970s around the same time as the US coming off of the gold standard. And everybody who's familiar with the petrodollar knows that this is an agreement that OPEC countries came to that basically states that the oil markets will have to acquire US dollars, and every barrel of oil is traded in US dollars. It's denominated in US dollars. So what does this do? Why is this important? It means that if you're a country that wants to buy oil, you must first acquire US dollars. That's super important because it keeps the demand for the dollar, the global demand for the dollar, high. This is one of the reasons why the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And so if you're wanting to buy oil, you have to get US dollars first. And on the flip side of that, if you are a country that's exporting oil, that means that you get paid in US dollars. Now, what do you do with the dollars that you have? Well, what you do is you use that money, the US dollars, and you reinvest it back into US assets, into the US financial system, either buying treasury bonds or, the stock market or whatever, because it's a pain in the ass to take all that money and then convert it back to your own currency. And so the way that the United States actually funds the spending that we do is through selling US treasuries. And the United States debt is over $38 trillion currently. We have a massive spending problem in this country. One of the ways that we finance that is through selling treasuries. And other countries, individuals, they buy treasury bonds because it's an easy way to park your money and get a guarantee on your money, whatever that yield is for the treasury. You put your money in, and then the United States government guarantees you a certain amount of yield or dividend on the money that you're buying up in terms of the debt. And so right now, the US debt is over 38 trillion. We spend over $1 trillion every single year just on the interest of the debt. So we have a massive, massive spending problem. We have to pay all these people in these countries back for all the money that we have lent out to them, or that they've bought up our debt. And so one of the things that keeps the demand for the dollar high and continues to allow the United States to spend like drunken sailors is the fact that people have a very, very high demand for the US dollar. And part of the reason why that is because of the petrodollar. Okay, so now getting to the war with Iran. Certain countries are not OPEC countries and they don't trade oil in the US dollar. They are not on the petrodollar system. And Iran was one of them. So Iran is an oil-rich country, and they export oil to US adversaries like China, like Russia. And that oil is not denominated in US dollars. So what does that mean? That means that that's money that's going onto the global oil market that's not going back into the US system. It's not going back into the US financial system. So the Russians, if they're doing this in rubles, or the Chinese are doing this in yuan, that money is not coming back to the United States, which hinders the United States' ability to continue to spend like drunken sailors and finance our debt. Another country that was also not on the US dollar was Venezuela. So the reason for bombing Venezuela is likely similar. Not only are they the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, the oil that they're exporting is not going to the United States, it's going to US adversaries, and it's being denominated in currencies that are not the United States dollar. If the world reserve currency is no longer the US dollar, the US is completely cooked. We are so done, it's beyond imaginable. And if you have countries that are not buying oil in US dollars, it's money that's not going back. And the other thing too is a lot of countries are trying to move off of the petrodollar, China being one of them, Russia being one of them, where they're trying to move to like the petro yuan, or they're buying this in rubles instead. They're buying oil in rubles instead. And so if those countries are not funneling their money into the US financial system, that hurts the United States' ability to continue to spend like crazy and finance the debt. And so I think that one of the reasons why nobody is talking about this is because, one, it's a very long and difficult explanation, although I hope I've kind of tied it all together. It's way easier to say, well, they had weapons of mass destruction and they were a global sponsor of terror and they were going to nuke the United States. That's a much easier explanation. or you've got like the religious zealots that think that this is a holy war, or you've got the people that are like, oh, well, Ali Khamenei was a bad person and a brutal dictator. None of that matters. The United States partners and supports dictatorships all over the world. That's not the thing. And it wasn't nukes because Iran, we have no evidence that they had nukes. Trump himself said last year that we had wiped out Iran's nuclear capabilities with the 12-year war, like Operation Midnight Hammer, where we bombed Iran the first time. So it's not about nukes. It's not about them being bad leaders. I think that this has everything to do with the petrodollar and making sure that the demand for the US dollar globally stays very, very high, because if it is not, and the US dollar gets dropped as the world reserve currency, that is the end of the United States as a global superpower, and everybody here would be completely destroyed if that happened. So, like I said, I think the reason they're doing it is, one, it's way too complicated to just go to the American people and say, hey, look, we've spent like drunken sailors for decades with money that we didn't have. We're way, way, way over borrowed, and the debt is through the roof, and we have to continue to get people to spend money into the US financial system in order to continue spending like drunken sailors like we want to do. It's way easier to just say, oh, it's about Iran having nukes. Like I said, the United States has a long and decorated history of lying to its citizens about why we went to war, but that is the reason that I think, or one of the reasons that I think this is going on. Anyway, guys, if you found this interesting or learned something, please do me a huge solid. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this with somebody who also might find this interesting, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.